Hey, Penn State fans, Bob Flounders joined by Johnny McGonigal. It is Monday, 1:30. Normally, for like the last few months, Johnny, we'd be kind of following James Franklin's weekly news conference, but this is the week where they are officially, with except for the bowl game, into their off season. Still one game to go. We don't know the identity of it, Johnny, but we have a lot to get to. Just a couple thoughts maybe on Penn State's win against Michigan State, also the bowl, the OC, all of it. The offseason isn't really that slow anymore, especially, Johnny. I know the transfer portal is about set to open, and people are going to be really curious to see the movement in and out from Penn State.
Yeah, Bob. I mean, like you mentioned, they still have a bowl game upcoming here in a month's time ish. We'll find out where they ultimately end up on Sunday afternoon when the final college football playoff committee rankings come out after the conference championship games on Friday and Saturday. And all signs right now are pointing to a New Year's Six bowl game. There's a chance that they might get squeezed out in the final rankings. It's just depending on what happens over the weekend. But just looking at some of the bowl projections right now, it's looking like a Peach Bowl in Atlanta, or maybe a Fiesta Bowl in Arizona. But so we'll have to stay tuned on that. But like you mentioned, the off season, it's not here yet technically, but it feels like it over these next couple weeks with what's coming down the pike with a new offensive coordinator hiring set to happen. I would think soon. We're recording this at 1:34 p.m. on Monday, so let's hope it doesn't happen while we're talking here, Bob.
Yeah.
And then, like you mentioned, the portal opening. It opens next Monday, December 4th, the day after those rankings come out.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to this weekend, Johnny. I'm looking forward to seeing some college football. I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not looking forward to the Big Ten title game. I think most, other than the Michigan and Iowa fan bases, I don't really know who's going to get too worked up about that game. But there's still Friday and Saturday. There are still some really good games. I'm hoping to see them. Obviously, Alabama, Georgia, Oregon, Washington's another one. I think that is going to have some implications. But who do you think Penn State fans should be watching, maybe with an eye towards the bowl game? Can we do that, or is it going to be? Is that team still? I mean, that team is probably not playing over the weekend. Whoever that team is.
Well, in terms of the projections, from what I've seen, Missouri is a very highly projected in terms of number of projections that they would play.
Yeah.
Maybe the Tigers in the Peach Bowl or in the Fiesta Bowl, and their season's done. They finished 10-2 with a win over the weekend. In terms of making a New Year's Six bowl game but not playing a Power 5 team, which Penn State did in the Cotton Bowl, playing Memphis a few years back, there's a chance that happens again. And right now, that team is Tulane, and they play in the AAC championship game against SMU. And so it could be the winner of that game, could potentially be Penn State's bowl opponent. If Tulane loses and they don't rank SMU, maybe it's an undefeated Liberty. So those are possibilities as well. There's a chance that if Texas loses in the Big 12 title game, that they get Penn State in an at-large New Year's Six game. There's a chance that if Alabama loses, they put Bama up against Penn State. There's still a lot of moving pieces. I'm just looking forward to watching the games this weekend from a football fan standpoint, because I think Oregon-Washington on Friday night is going to be a banger, Bob. I don't know about you. I'm taking Oregon in that game. I also low-key think Oregon is going to win. If they win on Friday night against Washington, I think they win the national title. I think they can do it. I just like the way that team is playing so well right now. But yeah, a lot of good football to watch over the weekend, and that's not including Michigan, Iowa, which is going to be like the ugliest, crappy bloodbath you'll ever see.
Yeah. You hate to see it for Kirk Ferentz. You hate to see it.
Truly, just a stand-up guy.
Johnny, speaking of games, just real quick, we did get to do a video after the game, Penn State's game on Friday night. Pressed for time, a little bit shorthanded, but Johnny, it was pretty clear early in this game that Michigan State just was going to have a really tough time against this Penn State team athletic, quick, and it's been a tough year for Michigan State. They've had a lot of distractions off the field. They have a new coach already since the interim coach Harley Barnett concluded his career against Penn State, but it just really wasn't. I don't know if it was. I mean, Penn State was very focused, but Michigan State they went kind of quietly. That surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of those where I thought maybe coming into that game, especially playing in Detroit, so many Michigan players, Michigan natives on that Michigan State roster, that it would be a pride thing for them to keep it close. But when the talent discrepancy is that big, when the coaching discrepancy is that big, when you got all that going on for Michigan State, who had nothing to play for at 4-7, I'm not necessarily surprised by the result.
Yeah.
And I was a little surprised that at halftime it was only 13-10. I felt like it should have been a heck of a lot more for Penn State, given how they were moving the ball and putting themselves in really good positions, having to settle for 3 field goal attempts in the first half, making 2 of them. But then, they put it away in the second half. And I think it was, impressive, but also kind of necessary, I feel like, for some of the guys to play the way that they did, play well. Going into a bowl game and then into 2024, you talk about Nick Singleton being the one first and foremost to finally crack that century mark, rushing this season. I believe he had 180 all-purpose yards or 180 scrimmage yards with the receiving. He had a 50-plus yard catch and run, which was nice to see. Katron Allen had a career high 137 rushing yards. And talking to Nick after the game, he committed himself to coming back to Penn State in 2024. I know that there was some rumblings amongst some fans that they were wondering, hey, could Nick leave because he's not the undisputed number one? And but it seems like Penn State will have that duo at running back for next season, which is big. Drew Aller also committing to playing at Penn State next year, which we spoke to him after the game. That was the first time we spoke to him since Yurcich was fired. And Mike Yurcich was such a big factor in Aller coming to Penn State in the first place. And he played really well against Michigan State too. So what you wanted to see on offense and what you wanted to hear after the game from those guys.
Yeah, and the way that Penn State did it, regardless of who's calling the plays, a much more organized approach, I think simplified. James talked about, especially with the wideouts, stop worrying about what they're not good at right now, and play to their strengths. What are they good at? And that's why I thought it's not a coincidence, Johnny. The last 2 games of the regular season, that Amari Evans kind of emerged and was able to kind of make an impact stretching the field. I think he had a 25-yard catch against Rutgers. He had a 60-yard catch in this game, which is an incredible throw by Drew Aller. But I just think that he was a guy that I think you and I both felt coming out of spring that uncertainty on the depth chart. This is a guy that can make his move. He's got the speed, and you didn't really know what Dante Cephas was going to do, but the season starts. I don't know if he was dealing with a minor injury, but he never really got going. But I think Mike Yurcich leaves and this guy starts making plays. I don't think that's a coincidence.
No, I don't think it is either. And James had talked about it before the Michigan State game about his wide receivers, and he mentioned it after the game as well. Just putting those guys in positions to, really lean on their strengths and showcase their strengths, and not so much, forcing, a round peg into a square hole kind of deal. Like just, asking a wide receiver to do things that maybe isn't their strong suit. And I think maybe, with Mike Yurcich as the offensive coordinator, he tried to just put the guys out there at wide receiver who were best equipped to maybe do everything on the whole and not necessarily do a singular job better than anyone else, if that makes sense. And I think Amari Evans, as a field stretcher, showed against Michigan State. He was open earlier in the game too, that I think Drew missed a touchdown when he completed it to Keandre Lambert-Smith for 22 yards, and then follows it up and ends up hitting Amari later in the game, which was a great throw, by the way. Us sitting up in the press box at Ford Field, watching him uncork that pass. I mean, that was 60 yards in the air. It's not like it was a 20-yard throw and then a run after the catch. I mean, it was really impressive. And Amari did a great job getting open and just barely getting tripped up, maybe on his own feet, maybe on a Michigan State defender on his way just shy of the end zone. But yeah, you talk about building blocks and players that use that regular season finale as an opportunity, maybe as a confidence booster going into bowl prep, and then next season. I mean, Amari Evans is one of those that definitely stands out.
Yeah, I like him. I think obviously there's probably some things he still needs to get better at. He can run. It was pretty clear in the blue-white game, even though it was a scrimmage, and it was definitely made more clear against Michigan State secondary. You're right. He is a player, I think, a young player that can really, really make a move. Johnny, I don't know that we're going to get a chance to talk again until after the portal opens, right? That's supposed to be a week from today. Is that right?
Yeah, it opens on next Monday, so Monday the 4th.
Yeah. So it's open. I think Penn State's open for business, as is every other school as far as talent acquisition. Johnny, if we had to talk about a list of 3 position priorities, I think we probably we could agree. I think at least on one, as would everybody else. But in your mind, who should Penn State be prioritizing? Not a specific player, but a position. I mean,
yeah, I think wide receiver remains the number one position of need for Penn State going into next season. That was the case this time last year. Again, I remember after the Rose Bowl, they get the commitment from Devin Carter from NC State, and he ultimately flips to West Virginia, but they bring in Malik McLean from Florida State. They bring in Dante Cephas from Kent State. They wanted Caden Prather, who ended up transferring to Maryland. They wanted Dante Thornton, who transferred from Oregon to Tennessee. They were in on a lot of guys last year. They're going to be in on a lot of guys this year too. And better believe that James Franklin is, once he gets the offensive coordinator hired down, he's going to be selling whoever he hired to those wide receivers in the portal. Marcus Hagans is going to be going to work to try to build relationships with these guys quickly and get them into Penn State, in the fold at Penn State. So wide receiver, I think, is the number one deal because, again, whether it's a coordinator, whether it's, assembling talent around him, you have to put Drew Aller in the best position to succeed in 2024, which, we talked so much this season about, Drew, not necessarily playing well against Michigan and Ohio State, and he took blame for that. But I also think that the pieces around him failed him, specifically at wide receiver and offensive coordinator. So that's the biggest need. But they've got other needs too. Like, you're going to be losing, I think, probably 2 corners in Kalen King and Johnny Dixon. You look at defensive end, Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac will be off to the NFL. I know they like their number 2s there with Dennis Sutton and Amin Vanover. But beyond them, Zariah Fisher has shown some flashes. But if there's an impact defensive end to be had out there, we saw that they've made no bones about going out and getting one with Chop a couple years ago. So, but wide receiver is definitely the number one priority.
Agree 100%. Johnny, let's flip it the other way now. You mentioned they're not going to. The next game won't be for a while. There are going to be some opt-outs. I would, excuse me. I don't think there's any chance there aren't. Who's on your list of? I mean, it could be a pretty long list, but who's on your list of? Hey, it was really nice watching these guys, but that's probably the last time I'm going to see them in the blue and white.
Yeah, I think the 2 guys who were preseason first-round projected draft picks that maintain that status are Olu Fashanu and Chop Robinson, and I would be very surprised to see them play in a bowl game. Kalen, I say maintain that status because Kalen King, before the year, was a projected first-round pick, preseason All-American. I think me and you both agree, and anyone really watching Penn State this year would agree that Kalen didn't necessarily play to that standard all the time, and he might be dropping in the draft a bit. Still a talented guy. I mean, you flip on that tape from 2022 if you're an NFL GM, and you would definitely want him in your secondary, but I think there's a question whether or not he'll go in the first round. For him, though, to go out with a win, and he's a Detroit native, and winning at Ford Field that's a pretty cool way, I'm sure, for him to go out. So I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't play in the bowl game either. Adisa Isaac is another one that really improved his draft stock, who had a serious injury that he had to come back from, and he did, and he really made some money for himself this season. Is he going to be willing to put himself at risk for another injury like that in a bowl game, especially if it's not a New Year's Six bowl, if they get left out of that, or no disrespect to the group of five, but if it's against a Tulane or a Liberty or an SMU, I think he would be a candidate for that as well. And that's just scratching the surface, but those are the four that I think are real candidates for that.
Yeah, I think maybe Curtis Jacobs too is a guy that, depending on how you view his season, there's a lot he can do for a team. And we talked that I think some NFL people really, really like him, but he's a guy certainly that I think has done all he needed to do on the college level. He's a 3-down linebacker who can really run. Played well against Michigan State, I thought, but the entire defense, Johnny, had themselves a day against the Spartans. They were just they couldn't do anything. 53 total yards, and the second half was actually just rough to watch. But I just bring that up because it was so much fun watching this defense. And you could say you're going to see him again, but I don't think you're going to see the Michigan State version of Penn State's defense, because there are going to be some people that leave.
Yeah, and this was the defense, so Bob, that we saw all season. I mean, it was a perfect regular season finale for Manny Diaz's unit. We talk about bowl opt-outs. I mean, there's a chance that Manny Diaz isn't coaching the defense in the bowl game if there's a head coaching gig that opens up that he fancies, and there's a school that wants him. I saw that there was talk that maybe he would, like, there was USC D coordinator talk around Manny. I think the way he's wired, I feel like he just wants to be head coach again. And so I feel like if he's going to leave Penn State, it would be for one of those opportunities. Right. You look at what the defense did against Michigan State and what it did really all season, being aggressive, being disruptive in the secondary, but really in the backfield around the line of scrimmage, shutting down the run game. I mean, I think Michigan State had 50 or 60 yards or something like that. There was a discrepancy between the live stats book that we would get during the game and the official NCAA stats. But either way, Michigan State averaged 1 yard a play. It was ridiculous. And a lot of that has to do with Manny Diaz and the talent that was at his disposal. So the defense will be looking differently, I would suspect, in the bowl game. But they've got a lot of young players too ready to step up, and that's kind of what these opportunities are for. Obviously, you want to go out with a win and get to 11-2. Mm-hmm. But you look at a Tony Rojas, right? If Curtis Jacobs decides to opt out, I mentioned Zariah Fisher as a player off the edge. Jameel Lyons maybe. Mm-hmm. If Chop and Adisa don't play, Drew Shelton at tackle, maybe even Javen Williams gets some run, assuming Olu doesn't play in the bowl game. So, this is a team that has been using its depth really well. I think, especially last year, but even this year too. Mm-hmm. They haven't earned as many red shirts this year, but still have a lot of young talent that's going to factor in 2024, in 2025. And these 15 practices ahead of a bowl game, plus the actual bowl game, I think will be big for their development.
Yeah, Johnny, I'm actually I'm sure we'll be looking once we learn the bowl game and the team they're going to play. We'll be writing a lot about some players maybe to really watch during the 15 practices and then the game itself. But just off the top of my head, you mentioned the corners. If Penn State's down a couple of corners in the bowl game, I mean, it's not great, but for me, it means more Cam Miller. I would imagine a guy like Daquan Hardy is going to play in that game. But also they have some young defensive backs that they really like at corners. Elliott Washington is one. I think Zion Tracy is another. But I think that they really like the group, and if they get some exposure, not just on the practice field, but in the bowl game, it's going to be it'll be a pretty good defense again. I don't think it's going to be this good, 2023 good, but it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, they've got talent up and down that depth chart, not just in the two deep. You see Tony Rojas come in the game in every fourth quarter, and it feels like he doesn't rack up 15 tackles, but it feels like he does because he's always around the ball. At corner, you mentioned Elliott Washington and Zion Tracy. King Mack also in that secondary are guys who have already burned their red shirts, so it's not like you're worried about them throwing them out there and them not being ready, to play in a game like that. They've been on the field, whether it's been special teams or chipping in on defense late. And what is really nice too, Bob, is that something just to reiterate is that the bowl game does not count against a player's red shirt. So I'll have to take a look and see which freshmen are hanging around. If there are freshmen that are at the 4-game limit right now. If there are, it's not like playing them in a bowl game will affect their eligibility moving forward. So that's also good for James Franklin and his coaching staff as they sift through the opt-outs and the potential transfer portal exits as well, guys who might want to enter and leave before a bowl game, in terms of what they'll have to work with in whatever bowl they end up playing in.
Yeah. One more thought here, Johnny. So I just think that after they cut ties with Yurcich, I mean, there's some takeaways there. Like it's who has shown what's different, and you can tell. I don't think they were on the same page because some of the things we're getting to see, again, whether it was Rutgers or Michigan State, they seem pretty obvious, but they didn't really go into the game plan. You're seeing more of Bo Prabula. A couple of plays where they're both on the field at the same time, but he's a weapon, right? And he needed to be, not just play. They played some tough games. He wasn't always on the field. I thought that was key. And I mentioned Amari Evans, another guy I think that for whatever reason, I just don't think that. I don't know if he was hurt, but he just looked like a guy in the spring, Johnny, that he was going to be a player. So those two things I thought were very encouraging for this offense.
Yeah, and you mentioned Amari. I think just bigger picture with the wide receiver room as a whole, we talk about that being a group that is going to be an area of focus in the transfer portal. They used a lot more wide receivers over the last couple weeks. After Yurcich was fired, it wasn't just Amari that was getting in there. I mean, they were rotating pretty heavily even early in that Michigan State game, and a part of that is maybe a detriment to like a Keandre Lambert-Smith. Who it felt like he hadn't been targeted in forever until he had that 22-yard catch against Michigan State. He didn't have a catch against Rutgers. You mentioned last week, is he in the witness protection program? I'm interested to see his future and what he decides to do because he's a player that entered this season that probably thought, hey, if I come out here as the number one wide receiver and post like an 800, 900-yard season, NFL scouts are going to be all over me. And he has the big play potential, but was really inconsistent this year and not always finishing routes. And so we'll see, if he decides to come back to Penn State, if he decides to, take his chances at the NFL, if he decides, hey, I'm going to enter the portal and see if there's a better opportunity for me elsewhere. Yeah. So Keandre is an interesting one just to keep an eye on because, this is a wide receiver room that while they didn't show it this year, certainly there were, that was the primary issue of the offense this year, in my opinion. It's still guys that are talented, like an Amari Evans, like a Caden Saunders. Dante Cephas, I still think, has that kind of dog in him, that really good wide receiver in him. They just have to kind of extract that from him. So it's a really interesting room at an interesting juncture right now as the portal is getting set to open before the bowl game.
Yeah. Johnny, I can't let you go until you give me your pick of the week. Just for the Penn State fans, the holidays creeping a little bit closer. I know usually if you have a strong opinion or a feeling about a game, chances are you might be right. So just is there one game, Johnny, that you think either there's going to be a surprise or you really think the favorite is absolutely going to just go to work on the other team? Is there a game that jumps off the page to you so we can make the fans of the Blue White breakdown some money? No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. It's tough because initially I mentioned at the top of the podcast that I love Oregon, but 9.5 is a lot of points. They're 9.5-point favorites over Washington, and we saw that game. It was a 3-point game earlier this season, but Washington has struggled a little bit. I would probably steer clear of the 9.5. I think that's just too big of a number, personally. I like Texas minus 13.5 against Oklahoma State because Texas finds itself in a position where they not only need to win, I think, but they probably need to win convincingly. There's a lot of variables at stake here in terms of their potential, CFP in terms of them getting a bid, because they have one loss to Oklahoma. But if they're able to go out there and just storm it and kill Oklahoma State, and there's a loss or two, or it makes that conversation around them and maybe Florida State a little closer. They have that win over Alabama, and I think Texas, after kind of dragging a little bit for a few weeks, came out last week and played really well. So I think on the big stage, Quinn Ewers and that offense will shine, and I like Texas this week to come.
And we're also going to be holding you. You snuck it. You tried to sneak it past us. If Oregon wins this weekend, you like them. You like them to win it all.
I do. Yep.
That'd be a nice little price if you hit on that one.
Yeah. I think it's. I think it's around like it was like 14-1 odds like a month ago or a month and a half ago. I'm not sure what it is right now. I'm curious. Let's check. This is great podcasting. But I do like
Jones move, by the way, you're pulling.
It really is. Okay, so they're plus 480 right now. Yeah, so they're the third favorites. You've got Michigan, Georgia, Oregon, and then Texas. So yeah. Also, just what are your thoughts, Bob, on Georgia, Alabama? Because it's a 5.5 point spread.
Yeah, right. So Alabama, survives against their arch rival on the arch rivals field. I think there's no way they would ever look past Auburn, but Auburn was geared up for that game, and that was their bowl game. I still think that Alabama has the athletes, obviously, to beat Georgia. They certainly have gotten better as the years gone on, and 5.5 to me, it seems too good to be true. But I don't know. I think Georgia, they could be peaking at the right time, but I think that Alabama. I don't think Alabama necessarily played poorly against Auburn. I think Auburn gave it their best shot. I think they probably will cover the spread. I don't know if they could beat Georgia, but I would definitely take the 5.5. It'll
be interesting too to see if that line moves at all this week. If people come in and throw a lot of money on Georgia or
like
Alabama. No. maybe a former PennLive worker here, but no, it'll be interesting to see if that line moves one way or the other. Because I wouldn't be surprised if it got up to 7. I wouldn't be surprised if it got to 4. So we'll have to keep. We'll definitely be keeping tabs on that, Bob.
Yep. All right, Penn State fans, we'll be back. Who knows what's going to happen in the next week or so, but I think there's going to be a lot of news. So stay tuned. Look forward at PennLive. Bob Flounders, Johnny McGonigal, signing off.